It's time now for our political panel. Jamal Simmons is a Democratic strategist and host on Hill TV. David Frum is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Michael Crowley is a White House correspondent covering foreign policy for The New York Times. And Laura Barron-Lopez is a national political reporter at Politico. Good to have you on Face the Nation.
Thank you.
We just revealed that battleground tracker that moves Elizabeth Warren into the top spot. Is that also what you've been hearing out there on the campaign trail?
Yes, we've seen, as I've been on the campaign trail, as a number of my colleagues have been, we've seen this slow and steady rise from Warren. She has very systematically put a lot of boots on the ground in places like Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada. She's been very methodical about getting data on voters, and she has been trying to really utilize her niche, which is I have plans for almost everything, and she's really heavily leaned into that, and it appears to be working because she is slowly gaining on Biden.
But it also suggests, according to our polling, that there is more attraction to this idea of the progressive wing of the party. Jamal?
Yeah, I think my math for this election has been pretty consistent. The Democrats need a progressive that they can sell to the center, not a centrist that they have to sell to the progressive wing. I mean, that's sort of what the John Kerry election was in 2004. That's sort of what the Hillary Clinton election was in 2016. Those didn't work out very well. I would just say this. If you look at the history of the New Hampshire primary, then 5 times a Massachusetts official has run in the New Hampshire primary, Democrat and Republican, since 1988. Each one of those people either won the New Hampshire primary, or they came in second, like Romney, but all of them got over 30%. Mitt Romney got the lowest at about 31, 32% when he ran in 2008. So the probability is that Elizabeth Warren will win the New Hampshire primary. What does that do to Joe Biden, whose entire election is predicated on him being the winner when he may not be winning?
David, you saw in just the past few hours another entrant into the Republican race. Mark Sanford, the former congressman from South Carolina, wants to challenge President Trump. Trump campaign says, it's irrelevant. Is it?
Well, they have certainly made it so that Mark Sanford will not be able to vote for himself in his own state's primary because they have shut down the state primary. Donald Trump is so popular in the Republican Party that he does not want Republicans to vote on his renomination. That's how popular he is. The story of the Republican Party...
It's not unprecedented that the caucuses have been canceled in some of these states.
It is not unprecedented, but it's something where when a president wants to demonstrate the strength of his support in the party, that these kinds of acclamations can be useful. The key to Donald Trump's position in the Republican Party is a problem of fractions, which is that he is getting a bigger and bigger share of a smaller and smaller party.
Bigger and bigger share of a smaller and smaller party, but yet not willing to count him out.
Well, that he's going to be the nominee, I think that we count him in.
No, but potential re-election.
His potential re-election, I think, suddenly looks worse this fall than it did this summer. The story that things are beginning to go wrong. The price of his policies is arriving. The bread and butter issues, you can just see everywhere around us, the signs, not of economic trouble, actually, but of economic warning. And we're seeing consumer confidence leaking. We are seeing the financial markets reacting badly. And we're seeing that the things that the president might try to do to save the economy are temperamentally unavailable to him. That to find some way of reaching some kind of agreement with the Chinese on taking off the table the stupid things that we're arguing about, like washing machines, and focusing on the important things, intellectual property and the security of the 5G network. He can't do that, and the consequences of his inability are affecting real people's wages, which are now flat, and soon will be affecting real people's jobs.
And Michael Crowley, President Trump has sold himself as a deal maker. We just saw another potential deal literally fall apart in the past 24 hours with Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, first of all, what an amazing turn of events. I think that much of Washington was prepared for a big announcement that they had reached a conclusion. Now everything is kind of in pieces on the floor. And it's an example, I think, of how, the president practices this kind of wild seat-of-the-pants diplomacy. It reminds me a lot in broad strokes of his approach to North Korea, the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. I'm going to go meet with this guy who had basically never met another foreign leader before. Everyone was astonished. You can't do that. that. Yes, I can. This Camp David thing would have been the same thing. You know, this is crazy. What are you talking about? The Taliban is going to come to America. They're going to come to Camp David a few days before 9/11. And this is how the president operates. And I think he loves to kind of gobsmack us, and also thinks that by kind of breaking through these walls, things become possible. But Margaret, we're not seeing the results. I mean, his diplomacy with North Korea has essentially gone nowhere. Kim Jong-un is still producing nuclear material at a pretty steady pace, launching short-range missiles. He has stopped some tests. And Afghanistan now, this peace process is in tatters, and who knows what happens next. So this president's improvisational, wild style, I think, earlier in his administration, some people thought, wow, he might actually be able to get some things done that other presidents couldn't with their conventional ways. I think there's a lot more skepticism about that right now.
And yet this is a popular thing to run on for Democrats. The idea of ending the war, bringing the boys home is something every single candidate says they're going to do. Very few have actually detailed how they're going to do it. Does this force Democrats to answer those questions now, or do we just move on to the next crisis?
I think a bit of both. I think you might see some Democrats trying to answer that, to strike another contrast with Trump. But again, a lot of what's going on in the primary race right now is very insulated. They aren't always reacting to Trump or what he is doing in the immediate sense. They're staying focused on the plans and the visions that they want to bring to the voters.
And this may be an opportunity for all normal politicians to reintroduce the American people to basic concepts of operationality. There are reasons why these kinds of discussions are handled at the special envoy or assistant secretary level and not brought to Camp David until there's a success to announce, that you do not commit the president's time, and maybe Democratic candidates could begin. Because I think one of the great challenges for the country in 2021, if there's a Democratic president, is all this progressive energy you describe is going to find itself running into a whole series of objective walls, a probable Republican majority in the Senate, terrible fiscal problems, even if there isn't a recession, much worse fiscal problems if there is, the intractability of the healthcare problem. This moment, which is not central to people's voting concerns, is a good moment to say these problems are hard, they are difficult, we are not making promises, we certainly are going to do our best, but we're going to do our best through channels, and we're going to have a special envoy in Afghanistan, not the president doing seat of the pants diplomacy, as Michael calls it.
Jamal, I want to ask you as well about, gaffes, I guess, is the word we can use on the campaign trail. Kamala Harris, who we showed in our poll, was losing some ground to the benefit of Elizabeth Warren, had to apologize for something she said at a rally this week. Or let's listen to what she said.
There needs to be accountability. I mean, what are you going to do in the next 1 year to diminish the mentally retarded action of this guy?
Well said. Well said.
I played that so people could judge for themselves. What was she laughing at?
It was a bad moment. And I think her campaign would have come off better if she had said after this, when they asked her, you know what, I reacted poorly to that. I wish I hadn't, instead of saying she hadn't heard it. But that's what happens in campaigns. Campaigns have bad moments. Elizabeth Warren is still trying to get past the Pocahontas and the DNA and all that other stuff. Campaigns have bad moments. The next question is, what are you offering the people, right? Donald Trump is going to say all the things that it is he's going to say about the Democratic nominee. The question is, what are you offering people that they want to be out there and be for, and they're going to go and rally behind you because of that, despite whatever mistakes it is that you've made. And I think people are still waiting to hear from Kamala Harris a concise message about what those things are. About what those things are.
Crowley, Sharpiegate.
Thank you for asking. Right.
What do we make of it?
Well, look, we've all, we know the details by now of the president taking his Sharpie to his hurricane map, and on some level, it's a total theater of the absurd. On another, I think it's, encapsulates American politics right now. The president essentially tried to distort fact. He got the facts wrong, then tried to retroactively distort them. Looks like he enlisted government officials to back him up, wouldn't back down, showed, number one, a complete obsession with media coverage, and number two, an incredibly thin skin. But I think that, there's 40, maybe 40 and change % of the country that thinks this was the media, this is the White House's line, this is the media going after Trump relentlessly, making too much out of something that wasn't that big of a deal. And this is like this rinse, wash, and repeat cycle we have in the country, where now about half the country thinks the president basically isn't playing with a full deck, and some large number thinks that he he can't get a fair shake, and it's going to come right down to November, and I think be a close call as to which one of these sides tilts higher.
But isn't the National Weather Service event the bigger part of this story? The fact that the president said something that wasn't right, and the scientists and the government are being compelled to, one, not contradict the president, and then two, put out a statement that seems to contradict other scientists and the government.
And also, the president's own defense also raises an interesting point. The president's defense is, I heard at one point that Alabama was at risk. By the time I made my statement, Alabama was no longer at risk, and I insisted it was. The question is, well, what were you doing in that interval? And the answer was, I was taking no briefings because I was golfing. And I think that these stories, even the small ones, they reveal something about a unique process of government in which the president does not take his responsibility seriously. It's not just a matter of lying. It's a matter of not doing the work, and that's what necessitates the lie.
Laura, there were a number of stories regarding controversies surrounding Trump properties, from the vice president staying at one in Ireland to what we are now looking at with an investigation in Congress into properties in Scotland. Tell us what we need to know.
Right, so the House Judiciary and House Democrats as a whole are expanding their scope, and they want to define very clearly what their impeachment inquiry would look like. And so on top of potential obstruction of justice issues that came out from the Mueller report, they are adding to that by wanting to look into whether or not the president has violated the emoluments clause, whether or not he is profiting off of the presidency with stays like Pence's in Doonbeg in Ireland, as well as the president's suggestion that the G7 stay in Doral at the Doral Resort in Florida next year. And so Democrats want to add those to their impeachment inquiry. And we could see a vote as early as next week on adding this extended scope.
We will watch for that this week.
Are the Trump hotels a presidential tip jar? That's what we need to know.
We'll leave it there. Thank you. We'll be back in a moment.